Hi guys!
Hi,
Hello and welcome back to Brokenness Meets Grace. We're so happy that you joined us again for our second episode. The last episode rather, we covered what grace means, in alignment with our title and the title of our podcast, Brokenness Meets Grace. So we talked about what grace means and we got a lot of some of your comments. Thank you for commenting and thank you for interacting with us on our social media platforms. We really appreciate your input. Today we have a special guest. We have a special guest as we cover brokenness. Like we said the last time, today we're going to be covering brokenness. And we are joined by this wonderful young man over here. Please introduce yourself to the people.
Thank you so much, Amoni. My name is Kuda, and I look forward to do this with you guys. We're gonna learn a lot of things from you guys, and
So excited. So Kuda is a friend of ours. His wife is actually our friend. And we roped him into being our guest today because we just thought that it's a great topic and he can contribute to it. We always want to make it balanced, so it's not the women, we can talk a lot, so it's nice to have some testosterone in the building, just to get some perspective, so Kuda and his wife Sue, shout out to Sue.
Hi Sue.
They were kind enough to join us today, so thank you for being here, Kuda. Right, so as we discussed last time we recorded, we touched on grace, what it means to each of us, our experience with grace, what it's done for us, where it's taken us, and today we're going to be talking about brokenness, right? I was telling Karabo the other day that I feel like it's such an ugly word. Like, it's not a word that I like to use, the word brokenness, especially to describe or define people. I feel like it's almost insulting, to call someone broken, you're a broken person, or to refer to myself as broken. But in reality, it's the only word that really describes some of the things that we experience or some of the characteristics that we develop over time, I think. And today we're just going to unpack what it means. What does the word itself mean? Karabo, what's your input on what brokenness means?
I agree what you mean in terms of the fact that brokenness is such an ugly word. It's almost like derogatory in a sense. But I think it just speaks to how altering it is, that you want to use something so strong to describe your mental state or your emotional state in that moment, that it feels like you're broken. My personal definition of brokenness is basically in reference to the fact that something was together, something was put together, something was perfect in a sense, but it's not perfect, and that makes it broken. And also, I think we have a preconceived notion that perfection looks a certain way. There is such a thing as perfection. There is such a thing as happiness. There is such a thing as, good home, all rounded. Is there in our mind already, in our spirit, in our souls. We believe that, and that's why we can reference something so opposite by saying it's broken, because there is an inner belief in us that knows and believes that there is a perfection. So for me, it's just the opposite of perfect. And brokenness wouldn't exist if there wasn't a perception of perfection, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with that 100% because I feel the same way, For me, I attribute it to the same thing, that something was whole and then it broke somewhere along the way, So the definition, like you're saying for me as well, is that something existed in its holistic sense and then it broke. Kuda?
Oh, thank you. It's a very sensitive subject. Like you say, both of you, I think you talked about if you put it as brokenness, and it sounds like something so bad and something so I think for myself, it's basically the state of mind or a state of emotions that's not where it's supposed to be. It can be influenced by external forces, or it can be something that's building up from your inner self, but that turns out to be a bad thing towards your life or towards everyone around you, and that kind of thing. I think that's what brokenness for me
means. And that's an interesting perspective because, I mean, if you think about it, collectively, our definitions of brokenness is we've sort of attributed to people. you know. It's interesting because when you start looking at it as society, for example, you know, what do we think of a broken society? What's the definition of that?
What does that look
You know,
like?
Kuda?
Yeah, I think if you say a broken society, I think there's a number of factors
Yeah.
that would influence that. I would like to probably throw in some examples that I might think of. I think if you are in a community where there is a lot of drugs, people are doing drugs, or if you're in a community where there is no hope, like your role models, all your role models, they're doing the wrong things and stuff like that, then obviously society might have a massive impact on your personal capacity and yes,
definitely. And Garal, for you, when you think broken society, what's your not necessarily definition of it, but you know, how do you rate it? Spiritually even, like what's your definition of that? Like how did things break? You know?
I think I agree with Kuda, particularly the way hopelessness. I think that's a very common denominator in a lot of our communities, a lot of society really, is just a bleak look on life and a bleak perspective really, because you think that there's no hope, because you have no value. And that really started at a very, very young age. You know, it's actually quite staggering to know how many young people suffer from bleak outlooks. Like they don't know what they're going to do for the future, they don't know what they're going to be. You know, they can't see a beautiful future because they are, first of all, groomed into hopelessness themselves because of their surroundings and their friends and their family and the society and the culture. The culture doesn't really promote hope, it just deteriorates it. So I think hopelessness is one of the most predominant aspects of brokenness from a young age, and you kind of grow into embracing it as you grow older, you know, and it becomes a way of life and acceptance as well. It's like a bleak acceptance of this is just how life is and this is my lot in life and I just have to embrace it. And it is, like you mentioned, I think a spiritually deep-rooted fundamental loss, you know, like a separation really of who you were meant to be. Like we mentioned, that there is a perception of wholeness and perfection, but it's missing. And that's where brokenness comes into the play, because you can kind of identify that there's something missing, that there's something that you need to fulfill you. And that, in my opinion, really comes from your spirit.
So definitely, and I mean I agree with that. And you know what, we can talk religion, you know, till we're blue in the face, and we'll have so many differing opinions on it. But I think you mentioned a very important factor, and that's spiritually, right? I think at the core of each and every one of us, we're all spirit, you know, and our perceptions of how we see life, how we see ourselves, they're rooted in who we are at our center, you know, and that's spiritually, you know, wherever you choose to attribute that, if you're attributing it to Christianity or whatever, but at the core of our values, or the core of who we are as people, is our spirit. And that's why often when people talk, they'll talk about a broken spirit, right? They'll talk about feeling not whole, feeling like something is missing. And it's not on the surface, but it's a deep-rooted spiritual loss, you know? And like you said, I feel like the reason that we're all going around feeling that way or experiencing some form of brokenness or the other is because we lost a connection to that spiritual wholeness. We either deviated from it or, you know, worked further away from it, but somehow our connection to that spiritual place that keeps us centered and keeps us whole was lost. Do you agree with that, Kuda? Do you agree with?
Absolutely. It's you know, it's now that we're talking about it, you know, sometimes I think about people who are broken probably inside and they don't even know about it, you understand, and that kind of thing. So if we are putting it to the table, maybe there's going to be someone who can identify and say, okay, if this is what they were talking about in terms of brokenness, so I might be broken sometimes because obviously they like you say, the wholeness might be lost and things like that.
I think that's honestly the crux of where brokenness comes from, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it because I think as people we have the view that we can fix ourselves, you know.
Absolutely,
but we're a failed race, failed humanity, and we really think we're gonna be successful at fixing ourselves. You know, it's not going to happen that way. And for me, if I can't fix myself, then there has to be a higher power, who can, right? So, Karabo, I don't know, do you agree in the sense that our spirituality is rooted, or our lack of spirituality is rooted to our brokenness?
Definitely. I mean, like you just mentioned now, so many people try to fix themselves. Like literally, there's so much created in helping people
self-help
fix themselves that doesn't work, People have exhausted means, have exhausted resources to go across the world to fix themselves, to speak to people who can help fix them, to listen to psychiatrists, psychologists, even like vices, as somebody who partook in a lot of vices to just try and fix myself or even just cope really with my brokenness, it doesn't help. It doesn't really solve the crux of what's really broken or what's really wrong with each and every one of us. So in my opinion, it can only point to a spiritual lack,
a supernatural
lack, because everything physical can't remedy what is missing or can't remedy what is broken. And I found it to be a supernatural experience myself. So I'm definitely speaking from a relatability aspect, and I think that is the crux of our brokenness that not a lot of people are willing to address or even admit to.
And you, do you agree? Do you think that spirituality and brokenness are linked, or there's a relationship between the two?
Absolutely. If you look at spirituality, the more that you try to deny yourself from your spiritual side, the more that you find yourself being broken. So if you don't deal with your spiritual self, then you won't be able to identify whether you're broken or to solve problems that causing your brokenness. So there's I think it leads me to say these things. The only if you are broken, the most solution, or the best solution that you can get it from a spiritual side. That is, if you go to church, or if you can go to someone who's like you say, the higher power, or that's where you can get the healing, because nowhere else. You can go to doctors, you can go to anyone, but it won't solve the problem that you have. So I think spirituality is the center of brokenness.
Definitely. And I mean, that's such a good point, because let's be honest, let's not beat around the bush. We've tried it. We've tried different things. And if we were really so good at being able to fix ourselves, psychologists are there, but I mean, if it was enough to just sit on someone's couch and talk about your problems, society wouldn't be the way that it is today, If it was enough to throw a party every weekend, to forget the pain, to forget the brokenness, we wouldn't be where we are today. If it was enough for us to eat our way to happiness, we wouldn't be where we are today. But clearly, if everything that we have tried in our human capability is not working, then it has to point to something spiritual, right? And that's the basis really of this podcast, is that in our brokenness, grace, which we talked about last week, meets us there, Thank goodness for it, because it's because of it that we're able to actually piece together our broken lives, And I'm sure we have a lot of experiences personally with brokenness. Carol, do you want to share your personal experience with brokenness?
Yeah, I've had so many experiences where I could identify that this is a miss or this is wrong. But the most prominent brokenness for me was just my mental illness that I suffered with for a very, very long time, because it just made me believe that my mind was broken, and I believed that there was just something wrong with me. It's not something that I would speak about, because I didn't really understand it myself, and I thought that I just needed to just get over it and deal with life and deal with it, So I didn't want to voice it out because I was also scared that speaking about it would bring light to my brokenness. At the same time, I'm also trying to, I fully acknowledge that there's something wrong with me, but I don't want to speak about it as well. It was a very conflicting emotional state I was faced with for the longest time. But was mentioned earlier in the podcast, the fact that I believed fully that there was something wrong with my mind meant that I was meant to have a sound mind. You know, meant that I was meant to be confident because I was super self-conscious. You know, I was meant to be fearless, but I was filled with anxiety. You know, meant that I was meant to be just like this happy-go-lucky person, but I was continuously depressed. You know, so it was very opposite emotions to how I believe I should be feeling. I even just got used to it. You know, I accepted that I was born this way. This is how I was meant to live life, and I must just accept that I'm just different and I'm strange. And that's just my lot in life, really, to have a fractured mind and to just learn how to live with it.
Yeah, and Kuda, your personal experience with brokenness?
Yeah, I think for myself, if I were to talk about brokenness, then it becomes very difficult because, like I said, sometimes we are broken and we don't know whether we're broken or not. So, but there were times where I was super down. I think growing up, my whole childhood, I was dealing with loss of esteem. So I think it's one part of brokenness. I would like to think it is, and then things like feeling whether you are self-sufficient or will you be able to take care of your family and things like that. And then another thing that I would think of recently that I got was the loss of my father. So I went through grief, and that's something that someone cannot fix for you, but only you and God can fix that for you. So I think those are the things that I can talk about.
And in those, in your journey with brokenness, when you're feeling the way that you felt, what was the common thread, if you get what I'm saying? So what was the one thing that was common with all three of those instances, when you're growing up and the loss of your father and self-sufficiency, the one thing that actually confirmed those feelings of brokenness within you?
Yeah, I think it's, like we talked about it earlier, in it's the society or the closest people to you, they can actually show you that there's a certain level of something is not quite right. You understand. And sometimes maybe your families can accept it, your immediate family will accept it. They know that this is what it is, but your other relatives and stuff like that, they'll probably show you that probably there's something wrong there and stuff like that. But
and I mean, for us it's important on the show, like we mentioned earlier, to get the perspective of a man. And I think this is one of the issues that a lot of men struggle with talking about in terms of is addressing their brokenness. Because as a man, I'm not a man, but as a man, but my understanding or what I've heard from most men is that it's a weakness to talk about these things. It's a weakness or it feels like you are weak when you are addressing depression or addressing elements of you that are broken, because you have to come across as though you have it together. Especially being a married man with a family and everything, you have to have your stuff together. Absolutely. Would you agree with that perspective, in the sense that that's generally how men deal with brokenness? Is that how you felt or how you feel?
And it's like added pressure.
It's men don't like to talk about these things, and even if you were to suggest that I go and see someone who can counsel me and stuff, I'll probably shy away. I'll probably don't go. And it's things that we think we are. Look, if you can lead a family, then you think you can lead everything in life, but that's not the real thing on the ground, you see. So, it's difficult. We don't talk about these things. I think and like you said now, that if you talk about it, you probably think that people who feel that you are weak and stuff like that, men don't cry. I don't know if you hear that one as well.
Tears are welcome.
So those kind of things, But in a way, it if you look at it, if you keep, let's say it's a young man or it's a boy being broken inside, they're not talking about it. Eventually, when that comes knocking, because there was an exercise that we did at work. They were talking about bottling emotions and stuff like that. I think I just want to just bring it a bit. I think it's in line with this as well. People bottle their emotions and then they keep bottling. And then when they cannot handle it anymore, then it flows out. But when it comes out, it's not nice. Then you affect everyone around you and you know. So the more that we encourage that people talk about their brokenness, the more that we can change the world probably.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And also on that note, the more we can encourage people not to see it as a defect.
It's a weakness.
Yes, you're broken or you feel broken or certain parts of you feel broken, but again, what this podcast is about, like I'm just trying to tell everybody what the podcast is about, right? But again, what this podcast is about is showing people that your brokenness is not a defect, just because you've gone through certain things or you experienced certain things in life and then left you feeling like a part of you is missing. You're not defective. Talk about it, address it, bring things out into the light so that you can actually fix things or see how to be a better functioning human being with that brokenness, Karabo, what would you say to that?
No, definitely. I mean, I literally lived throughout my whole mental illness journey in silence. I didn't ever really talk about it until I had to. But even still, it was like, little portions of it. It wasn't like the full extent of what I was experiencing or what I was really truly going through. Because from a mental illness perspective, you always think that your condition is trivial. You don't want to burden people with what you're going through, and it's so silly, and there's real life problems in the world, and people are not really concerned about how depressed or unhappy you are. So for me, it was my silence came from that it's not important to share, but it killed me even more by not speaking about it, and it's only thereafter in hindsight now I see that talking about it is actually more freeing and more healing than just bottling and keeping things in, because you suffer in silence quite literally. I think I've heard stories of people who have literally turned back from suicide because they spoke about what they were going through. They just wanted to vent, and they wanted to just share to a complete stranger, and even if people aren't able to give you advice that can help your situation, but just to be able to have words come out of your mouth that frees you up is really literally life-saving. Like it can save a life, it can save your life. So I am a big advocate, and I mean now all I do is talk. Like, I can't shut up. She really can't, guys. She's always speaking. I overshare, I cry. So
it's very, very important, I think, to do that. And this platform, we're going to be addressing many different forms of brokenness. We're going to be talking about addiction. We're going to be talking about mental health. We're going to be talking about broken homes. And the broken homes one is one that's very close to my heart, because that's a form of my personal brokenness that has really shaped a large part of my life. We grew up in a single parented home, and our home was broken quite literally because of abuse. So being raised from an age of like 4 years old, knowing that your parents were divorced, so already at that age you have an experience of what a broken home looks like, right? And to go into the world and as a child, face the world and interact with people with that sort of label, that you are a product of a broken home, you sort of underestimate just how much impact that has on the rest of your life until you actually start to see how your life pans out, And I just remember for me being, a young girl in my teens, or always thinking to myself, I don't want to have that life that, I came from in terms of a broken home. I was set in my mind that would never be me, But lo and behold, today I'm a divorcee, and of course, this isn't something that I wanted to happen. I really literally told myself it would never happen, but it played out that way because circumstantially things happened, and of course it landed up there. But those are two parts of brokenness that have really shaped my identity, my personal identity, because that's what I've experienced. And the biggest part of both times for me was getting to a point where on the other side of identifying that they're not disjointed. They're not unrelated, those two things. As much as I went through what I went through when I was young, and I told myself I'm not going to allow that to happen to me, the fact that it happened speaks to the fact that mentally we subconsciously maybe attach ourselves to our brokenness, to a place that we can't really separate ourselves from it. It becomes us. And it's like what you were mentioning earlier, that you almost put on this persona, for your whole life. This is how I am, and I had to learn, very recently, that certain things, the way that I thought about certain things needed to change, and I impacted, obviously not the younger part of my broken life, but certainly the older part, because of my thinking, because of how I saw life. And it's only now that in connecting with God and in really like digging deep, I'm able to recognize the root of some of these issues, and they are all linked in that brokenness that was sort of planted from a young age. They're linked to that, and it's a whole different topic for another day. But that's my, that's how I identify brokenness in my life. It's around the idea of a broken home.
Would you describe brokenness as like a form of scarring, like a spiritual scar? Hey, Kuda?
Yeah, I think it is. And you touched about family dynamics and stuff like that. Yeah, there's things like that you won't take away, especially how you grew up and stuff like that. Those scars will stay there forever, but you just have to find peace with yourself and then move on from there, because you can never take away that from yourself.
Definitely. Definitely, and I agree with that as well. The imagery of the podcast is a clay pot that's got cracks on it, right? And that's how I think we all look, visually. If God had a way of looking at us, we look like these pots with cracks on them, because life has happened to all of us, but what He's done is He's come and He's put glue on all of these cracks once we let Him, once we allow Him to take charge of our lives and make us see that yes, you're broken, you're a bit of a mess, but I can use this, So that imagery is beautiful. We look like the scars that we carry, but I think a lot of us want to carry the scar ashamed, right? Like, because we haven't dealt with it, like you said, because we haven't addressed it, we haven't called it what it is. We either want to cover the scar up to pretend it's not there and look to society like we have it figured out, or we are angry and we want to show the world the scar. We're bitter and resentful. We show everybody the scar, but from a bad place. The key in reconnecting spiritually to the only source that can really help you make sense of the scars, of the cracks, is to wear them gracefully. But you can only do that when you really start to understand what they mean and get to a place where you use them for something better.